The Dawn-Breakers, Nabil's narrative, recorded for the handicapped, take 4. After the death of the vizier, Haji Mirza Akazi continued to show the utmost consideration to Baha'u'llah. He would visit him at his home, and would address him as though he were his own son. The sincerity of his devotion, however, was very soon put to the test. One day, as he was passing through the village of Kuchhizar, which belonged to Baha'u'llah, he was so impressed by the charm and beauty of that place, and the abundance of its water, that he conceived the idea of becoming its owner. Baha'u'llah, whom he had summoned to effect the immediate purchase of that village, observed, "Had this property been exclusively mine own, I would willingly have complied with your desire. This transitory life, with all its sordid possessions, is worthy of no attachment in my eyes, how much less this small and insignificant estate. As a number of other people, both rich and poor, some of full age and some still minors, share with me the ownership of this property, I would request you to refer this matter to them and to seek their consent." Unsatisfied with this reply, Haji Mirza Akazi sought, through fraudulent means, to achieve his purpose. So soon as Baha'u'llah was informed of his evil designs, he, with the consent of all concerned, immediately transferred the title of the property to the name of the sister of Muhammad Shah, who had already repeatedly expressed her desire to become its owner. The Haji, furious at this transaction, ordered that the estate should be forcibly seized, claiming that he already had purchased it from its original possessor. The representatives of Haji Mirza Akazi were severely rebuked by the agents of the sister of the Shah, and were requested to inform their master of the determination of that lady to assert her rights. The Haji referred the case to Muhammad Shah, and complained of the unjust treatment to which he had been subjected. That very night, the Shah's sister had acquainted him with the nature of the transaction. "Many a time," she said to her brother, "your Imperial Majesty has graciously signified your desire that I should dispose of the jewels with which I am wont to adorn myself in your presence, and with the proceeds purchase some property. I have at last succeeded in fulfilling your desire. Haji Mirza Akazi, however, is now fully determined to seize it forcibly from me." The Shah reassured his sister, and commanded the Haji to forego his claim. The latter, in his despair, summoned Baha'u'llah to his presence, and, by every artifice, strove to discredit his name. To the charges he brought against him, Baha'u'llah vigorously replied, and succeeded in establishing his innocence. In his impotent rage, the Grand Vizier exclaimed, "What is the purpose of all this feasting and banqueting in which you seem to delight? I, who am the Prime Minister of the Shahanshah of Persia, never receive the number and variety of guests that crowd around your table every night. Why all this extravagance and vanity? You surely must be meditating a plot against me." "Gracious God," Baha'u'llah replied, "is the man who, out of the abundance of his heart, shares his bread with his fellow men to be accused of harboring criminal intentions?" Haji Mirza Akazi was utterly confounded. He dared no reply. Though supported by the combined ecclesiastical and civil powers of Persia, he eventually found himself, in every contest he ventured against Baha'u'llah, completely defeated. On a number of other occasions, Baha'u'llah's ascendancy over his opponents was likewise vindicated and recognized. These personal triumphs, achieved by him, served to enhance his position and spread abroad his fame. All classes of men marveled at his miraculous success in emerging unscathed from the most perilous encounters. Nothing short of divine protection, they thought, could have ensured his safety on such occasions. Not once did Baha'u'llah, beset though he was by the gravest perils, submit to the arrogance, the greed, and the treachery of those around him. In his constant association, during those days, with the highest dignitaries of the realm, whether ecclesiastical or state officials, he was never content simply to accede to the views they expressed or the claims they advanced. He would, at their gatherings, fearlessly champion the cause of truth, would assert the rights of the downtrodden, defending the weak and protecting the innocent. Chapter 6. Mullah Hussein's journey to Khorasan. As the Bab bade farewell to the letters of the living, he instructed them each and all to record separately the name of every believer who embraced the faith and identified himself with its teachings. The list of these believers he bade them enclosed in sealed letters and address them to his maternal uncle Haji Mirza Syed Ali in Shiraz, who would in turn deliver them to him. I shall classify these lists, he told them, into 18 sets of 19 names each. Each set will constitute one Vahid. A footnote says the numerical value of the word Vahid, which means unity, is 19. All these names in these 18 sets will, together with the first Vahid, consisting of my own name and those of the 18 letters of the living, constitute the number of Kul Ishay. A footnote says the numerical value of Kul Ishay, which means all things, is 361, or 19 times 19. Of all these believers I shall make mention in the tablet of God, so that upon each one of them the beloved of our hearts may, in the day when he shall have ascended the throne of glory, confer his inestimable blessings, and declare them the dwellers of his paradise. To Mullah Hussein, more particularly, the Bab gave definite injunctions to send him a written report on the nature and progress of his activities in Isfahan, in Tehran, and in Khorasan. He urged him to inform him of those who accepted and submitted to the faith, as well as of those who rejected and repudiated its truth. Not until I receive your letter from Khorasan, he said, shall I be ready to set out from this city on my pilgrimage to Hijaz. Mullah Hussein, refreshed and fortified by the experience of his intercourse with Baha'u'llah, set out on his journey to Khorasan. During his visit to that province, he exhibited in an astonishing manner the effects of that regenerating power with which the parting words of the Bab had invested him. The first to embrace the faith in Khorasan was Mirza Ahmad-i Ajghandi, the most learned, the wisest, and the most eminent among the ulamas of that province. In whatever gathering he appeared, no matter how great the number or representative the character of the divines who were present, he alone was invariably the chief speaker. The high traits of his character, as well as his extreme devoutness, had ennobled the reputation which he had already acquired through his erudition, his ability, and wisdom. The next to embrace the faith among the sheikhs of Khorasan was Mullah Ahmad-i Muallim, who, while in Kabila, had been the instructor of the children of Sayyid Kazim. Next to him came Mullah Sheikh Ali, whom the Bab surnamed Azim, and then Mullah Mirza Muhammad-i Furuhi, whose learning was unsurpassed except by that of Mirza Ahmad. No one apart from these outstanding figures among the ecclesiastical leaders of Khorasan exercised sufficient authority or possessed the necessary knowledge to challenge the arguments of Mullah Hussein. Mirza Muhammad Baqir-i Qaini, who for the remaining years of his life had established his residence in Mashhad, was the next to embrace the message. The love of the Bab inflamed his soul with such a consuming passion that no one could resist its force or could belittle its influence. His fearlessness, his unsparing energy, his unswerving loyalty, and the integrity of his life all combined to make him the terror of his enemies and a source of inspiration to his friends. He placed his home at the disposal of Mullah Hussein, arranged for separate interviews between him and the ulamas of Mashhad, and continued to endeavor to the utmost of his power to remove every obstacle that might impede the progress of the faith. He was untiring in his efforts, undeviating in his purpose, and inexhaustible in his energy. He continued to labor indefatigably for his beloved cause until the last hour of his life, when he fell a martyr at the fort of Sheikh Tabasi. In his last days he was bidden by Qudus, after the tragic death of Mullah Hussein, to assume the leadership of the heroic defenders of that fort. He acquitted himself gloriously of his task. His home, situated in Bala Qiyaban, in the city of Mashhad, is up to the present time known by the name Babiye. Whoever enters it can never escape the accusation of being a Babi. May his soul rest in peace. Mullah Hussein, as soon as he had won to the cause such able and devoted supporters, decided to address a written report concerning his activities to the Bab. In his communication, he referred at length to his sojourn in Isfahan and Kashan, described the account of his experience with Baha'u'llah, referred to the departure of the latter for Mazindaran, related the events of Nur, and informed him of the success which had attended his own efforts in Khorasan. In it he enclosed a list of the names of those who had responded to his call, and of whose steadfastness and sincerity he was assured. He sent his letter by way of Yazd to the trustworthy partners of the Bab's maternal uncle, who were at that time residing in Tabas. That letter reached the Bab on the night preceding the 27th day of Ramadan, a night held in great reverence by all the sects of Islam, and regarded by many as rivaling in sacredness the Laylatul Qadr itself, the night which, in the words of the Quran, excelleth 1,000 months. The footnotes here say that Ramadan, corresponding with the night preceding the 10th of October, AD 1844, and the Laylatul Qadr, meaning literally the night of power, is one of the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and, as is commonly believed, the 7th of those nights reckoning backward. The only companion of the Bab, when that letter reached him that night, was Qudus, with whom he shared a number of its passages. I have heard Mirza Ahmad relate the following. The Bab's maternal uncle himself described to me the circumstances attending the receipt of Mullah Hussein's letter by the Bab. That night I saw such evidence of joy and gladness on the faces of the Bab and of Qudus as I am unable to describe. I often heard the Bab in those days exultingly repeat the words, "How marvelous, how exceedingly marvelous is that which has occurred between the months of Jamadi and Rajab." As he was reading the communication addressed to him by Mullah Hussein, he turned to Qudus and, showing him certain passages of that letter, explained the reason for his joyous expressions of surprise. I, for my part, remained completely unaware of the nature of that explanation. Mirza Ahmad, upon whom the account of this incident had produced a profound impression, was determined to fathom its mystery. Not until I met Mullah Hussein in Shiraz, he told me, was I able to satisfy my curiosity. When I repeated to him the account described to me by the Bab's uncle, he smiled and said how well he remembered that between the months of Jamadi and Rajab he chanced to be in Tehran. He gave no further explanation, and contented himself with this brief remark. But this was sufficient, however, to convince me that in that city of Tehran there lay hidden a mystery which, when revealed to the world, would bring unspeakable joy to the hearts of both the Bab and Qudus. The reference in Mullah Hussein's letter to Baha'u'llah's immediate response to the divine message, to the vigorous campaign which he had boldly initiated in Nur, and to the marvelous success which had attended his efforts, cheered and gladdened the Bab, and reinforced his confidence in the ultimate victory of his cause. He felt assured that if now he were to fall suddenly a victim to the tyranny of his foes and depart from this world, the cause which he had revealed would live, would, under the direction of Baha'u'llah, continue to develop and flourish, and would yield eventually its choicest fruit. The master hand of Baha'u'llah would steer its course, and the pervading influence of his love would establish it in the hearts of men. Such a conviction fortified his spirit and filled him with hope. From that moment his fears of the imminence of peril or danger entirely forsook him. Phoenix-like, he welcomed with joy the fire of adversity, and glorified in the glow and heat of its flame. Chapter 7. The Bab's Pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. The letter of Mullah Hussein decided the Bab to undertake his contemplated pilgrimage to Hijaz, entrusting his wife to his mother, and committing them both to the care and protection of his maternal uncle. He joined the company of the pilgrims of Fars, who were preparing to leave Shiraz for Mecca and Medina. A footnote says, according to Haji Mu'inuz Sultani's narrative, page 72, the Bab set out on his pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina in October AD 1844. Qudus was his only companion, and the Ethiopian servant his personal attendant. He first proceeded to Bushir, the seat of his uncle's business, where in former days he, in close association with him, had lived the life of a humble merchant. Having there completed the preliminary arrangements for his long and arduous voyage, he embarked on a sailing vessel, which, after 2 months of slow, stormy, and unsteady sailing, landed him upon the shores of that sacred land. High seas and the complete absence of comfort could neither interfere with the regularity of his devotions, nor perturb the peacefulness of his meditations and prayers. Oblivious of the storm that raged about him, and undeterred by the sickness which had seized his fellow pilgrims, he continued to occupy his time in dictating to Qudus such prayers and epistles as he felt inspired to reveal. I have heard Haji Abul Hassan-i Shirazi, who was travelling in the same vessel as the Bab, describe the circumstances of that memorable voyage. During the entire period of approximately 2 months, he asserted, from the day we embarked at Bushir to the day when we landed at Jadi, the port of Hijaz, whenever by day or night I chanced to meet either the Bab or Qudus, I invariably found them together, both absorbed in their work. The Bab seemed to be dictating, and Qudus was busily engaged in taking down whatever fell from his lips. Even at a time when panic seemed to have seized the passengers of the storm-tossed vessel, they would be seen pursuing their labors with unperturbed confidence and calm. Neither the violence of the elements nor the tumult of the people around them could either ruffle the serenity of their countenance or turn them from their purpose. The Bab himself, in the Persian Bayan, refers to the hardships of that voyage. But first there is a footnote. It is thus that I myself saw, on the voyage to Mecca, a notable who was spending considerable sums of money, but who hesitated to spend the price of a glass of water for his fellow traveller. This happened on the boat, where the water was scarce, so scarce, in fact, during the voyage from Bushir to Muscat, which lasted 12 days with no opportunity to get water, that I had to content myself with sweet lemons. From the Persian Bayan, Volume 2, page 154. One cannot imagine on the sea anything but discomfort. One cannot have all the necessities, as in land travel. The mariners are obliged to live thus, but by their services they come nearer to God, and God rewards actions performed on the land and on the sea, but he grants a twofold recompense for those services accomplished by one of the servants on the sea, because their work is more arduous. Ibid, pages 155-6. I have seen, on the way to Mecca, acts of the vilest kinds in the eyes of God, which were sufficient to undo the good resulting from the pilgrimage. These were the quarrels among the pilgrims. Verily, the house of God has no need of such people. The Bab himself, in the Persian Bayan, refers to the hardships of that voyage. For days, he wrote, we suffered from the scarcity of water. I had to content myself with the juice of the sweet lemon. Because of this experience, he supplicated the Almighty to grant that the means of ocean travel might soon be speedily improved, that its hardships might be reduced, and its perils be entirely eliminated. Within a short space of time, since that prayer was offered, the evidences of a remarkable improvement in all forms of maritime transport have greatly multiplied, and the Persian Gulf, which in those days hardly possessed a single steam-driven vessel, now boasts a fleet of ocean liners that can, within the range of a few days and in the utmost comfort, carry the people of Fars on their annual pilgrimage to Hijaz. The people of the West, among whom the first evidences of this great industrial revolution have appeared, are, alas, as yet wholly unaware of the source whence this mighty stream, this great motive power, proceeds, a force that has revolutionized every aspect of their material life. Their own history testifies to the fact that in the year which witnessed the dawn of this glorious revelation, there suddenly appeared evidences of an industrial and economic revolution that the people themselves declare to have been unprecedented in the history of mankind. In their concern for the details of the working and adjustments of this newly conceived machinery, they have gradually lost sight of the source and object of this tremendous power which the Almighty has committed to their charge. They seem to have sorely misused this power and misunderstood its function. Designed to confer upon the people of the West the blessings of peace and happiness, it has been utilized by them to promote the interests of destruction and war. Upon his arrival in Jadi, the Bab donned the pilgrim's garb, mounted a camel, and set out on his journey to Mecca. Qudus, however, notwithstanding the repeatedly expressed desire of his master, preferred to accompany him on foot all the way from Jadi to that holy city. Holding in his hand the bridle of the camel upon which the Bab was riding, he walked along joyously and prayerfully, ministering to his master's needs, wholly indifferent to the fatigues of his arduous march. Every night, from eventide until daybreak, Qudus, sacrificing comfort and sleep, would continue with unrelaxing vigilance to watch beside his beloved, ready to provide for his wants and to ensure the means of his protection and safety. One day, when the Bab had dismounted close to a well in order to offer his morning prayer, a roving Bedouin suddenly appeared on the horizon, drew near to him, and, snatching the saddle-bag that had been lying on the ground beside him, and which contained his writings and papers, vanished into the unknown desert. His Ethiopian servant set out to pursue him, but was prevented by his master, who, as he was praying, motioned to him with his hand to give up his pursuit. "Had I allowed you," the Bab later on affectionately assured him, "you would surely have overtaken and punished him, but this was not to be. The papers and writings which that bag contained are destined to reach, through the instrumentality of this Arab, such places as we could never have succeeded in attaining. Grieve not therefore at his action, for this was decreed by God, the Ordainer, the Almighty." Many a time afterwards did the Bab, on similar occasions, seek to comfort his friends by such reflections. By words such as these, he turned the bitterness of regret and of resentment into radiant acquiescence in the divine purpose and into joyous submission to God's will. On the day of Arafat, which is the day preceding the festival, the Bab, seeking the quiet seclusion of his cell, devoted his whole time to meditation and worship. On the following day, the day after Nar, after he had offered the feast-day prayer, he proceeded to Muna, where, according to ancient custom, he purchased 19 lambs of the choicest breed, of which he sacrificed 9 in his own name, 7 in the name of Qudus, and 3 in the name of his Ethiopian servant. He refused to partake of the meat of this consecrated sacrifice, preferring instead to distribute it freely among the poor and needy of that neighborhood. Although the month of Zil-Hijji, December AD 1844, the month of pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, coincided in that year with the first month of the winter season. Yet so intense was the heat in that region that the pilgrims who made the circuit of the sacred shrine were unable to perform that rite in their usual garments. Draped in a light, loose-fitting tunic, they joined in the celebration of the festival. The Bab, however, refused, as a mark of deference, to discard either his turban or cloak. Dressed in his usual attire, he, with the utmost dignity and calm, and with extreme simplicity and reverence, compassed the Kaaba and performed all the prescribed rites of worship. On the last day of his pilgrimage to Mecca, the Bab met Mirza Muhit-i-Kirmani. He stood facing the black stone, and the Bab approached him, and taking his hand in his, addressed him in these words: "O Muhit, you regard yourself as one of the most outstanding figures of the Shaykhi community, and a distinguished exponent of its teaching. In your heart, you even claim to be one of the direct successors and rightful inheritors of those twin great lights, those stars that have heralded the morn of divine guidance. Behold, we are both now standing within this most sacred shrine. Within its hallowed precincts, he whose spirit dwells in this place can cause truth immediately to be known and distinguished from falsehood and righteousness from error. Verily I declare, none besides me in this day, whether in the east or in the west, can claim to be the gate that leads men to the knowledge of God. My proof is none other than that proof whereby the truth of the Prophet Muhammad was established. Ask me whatsoever you please. Now, at this very moment, I pledge myself to reveal such verses as can demonstrate the truth of my mission. You must choose either to submit yourself unreservedly to my cause, or to repudiate it entirely. You have no other alternative. If you choose to reject my message, I will not let go your hand until you pledge your word to declare publicly your repudiation of the truth which I have proclaimed. Thus shall he who speaks the truth be made known, and he that speaks falsely shall be condemned to eternal misery and shame. Then shall the way of truth be revealed, and made manifest to all men. This peremptory challenge, thrust so unexpectedly by the Bab upon Mirza Muhit-i-Kirmani, profoundly distressed him. He was overpowered by its directness, its compelling majesty and force. In the presence of that youth, he, notwithstanding his age, his authority and learning, felt as a helpless bird prisoned in the grasp of a mighty eagle. Confused and full of fear, he replied, "My lord, my master, ever since the day on which my eyes beheld you in Kabila, I seemed at last to have found and recognized him who had been the object of my quest. I renounce whosoever has failed to recognize you, and despise him in whose heart may yet linger the faintest misgivings as to your purity and holiness. I pray you to overlook my weakness and entreat you to answer me in my perplexity. Please God, I may, at this very place, within the precincts of this hallowed shrine, swear my fealty to you, and arise for the triumph of your cause. If I be insincere in what I declare, if in my heart I should disbelieve what my lips proclaim, I would deem myself utterly unworthy of the grace of the prophet of God, and regard my action as an act of manifest disloyalty to Ali, his chosen successor." The Bab, who listened attentively to his words, and who was well aware of his helplessness and poverty of soul, answered and said, "Verily I say, the truth is even now known and distinguished from falsehood. O shrine of the Prophet of God, and you, O Qudus, who have believed in me, I take you both in this hour as my witnesses. You have seen and heard that which has come to pass between me and him. I call upon you to testify thereunto, and God verily is, beyond and above you, my sure and ultimate witness. He is the all-seeing, the all-knowing, the all-wise. O Muhit, set forth whatsoever perplexes your mind, and I will, by the aid of God, unloose my tongue and undertake to resolve your problems, so that you may testify to the excellence of my utterance, and realize that no one besides me is able to manifest my wisdom." Mirza Muhit responded to the invitation of the Bab and submitted to him his questions. Pleading the necessity of his immediate departure for Medina, he expressed the hope of receiving, ere his departure from that city, the text of the promised reply. "I will grant your request," the Bab assured him. "On my way to Medina I shall, with the assistance of God, reveal my answer to your questions. If I meet you not in that city, my reply will surely reach you immediately after your arrival in Kabila. Whatever justice and fairness may dictate, the same shall I expect you to fulfill. If ye do well, to your own behoof will ye do well. If ye do evil, against yourselves will ye do it. God is verily independent of all his creatures." Verses from the Quran. Mirza Muhit, ere his departure, again expressed his firm resolve to redeem his solemn pledge. "I shall never depart from Medina," he assured the Bab, "whatever may betide, until I have fulfilled my covenant with you." As the moat which is driven before the gale, he, unable to withstand the sweeping majesty of the revelation proclaimed by the Bab, fled in terror from before his face. He tarried a while in Medina, and, faithless to his pledge, disregardful of the admonitions of his conscience, left for Kabila. The Bab, faithful to his promise, revealed on his way from Mecca to Medina his written reply to the questions that had perplexed the mind of Mirza Muhit, and gave it the name of Sahifi-i Bainul Haramain, which is the epistle between the two shrines. Mirza Muhit, who received it in the early days of his arrival in Kabila, remained unmoved by its tone, and refused to recognize the precepts which it inculcated. His attitude towards the faith was one of concealed and persistent opposition, At times he professed to be a follower and supporter of that notorious adversary of the Bab, Haji Mirza Karim Khan, and occasionally claimed for himself the station of an independent leader. Nearing the end of his days, whilst residing in Iraq, he, feigning submission to Baha'u'llah, expressed, through one of the Persian princes who dwelt in Baghdad, a desire to meet him. He requested that his proposed interview be regarded as strictly confidential. "Tell him," was Baha'u'llah's reply, "that in the days of my retirement in the mountains of Suleymaniye, I, in a certain ode which I composed, set forth the essential requirements from every wayfarer who treads the path of search in his quest of truth. Share with him this verse from that ode. If thine aim be to cherish thy life, approach not our court. But if sacrifice be thy heart's desire, come and let others come with thee, for such is the way of faith, if in thy heart thou seekest reunion with Baha. Shouldst thou refuse to tread this path, why trouble us? Be gone. If he is willing, he will openly and unreservedly hasten to meet me. If not, I refuse to see him." Baha'u'llah's unequivocal answer disconcerted Mirza Muhit. Unable to resist and unwilling to comply, he departed for his home in Karbala the very day he received that message. As soon as he arrived, he sickened, and 3 days later he died. No sooner had the Bab performed the last of the observances in connection with his pilgrimage to Mecca than he addressed an epistle to the sheriff of that holy city, wherein he set forth in clear and unmistakable terms the distinguishing features of his mission and called upon him to arise and embrace his cause. This epistle, together with selections from his other writings, he delivered to Qudus and instructed him to present them to the sheriff. The latter, however, too absorbed in his own material pursuits to incline his ear to the words which had been addressed to him by the Bab, failed to respond to the call of the divine message. Haji Niyazi Baghdadi has been heard to relate the following. In the year A.H. 1267, A.D. 1850-51, I undertook a pilgrimage to that holy city, where I was privileged to meet the sheriff. In the course of his conversation with me, he said, "I recollect that in the year 1260, during the season of pilgrimage, a youth came to visit me. He presented to me a sealed book, which I readily accepted, but was too much occupied at the time to read. A few days later I met again that same youth, who asked me whether I had any reply to make to his offer. Pressure of work had again detained me from considering the contents of that book. I was therefore unable to give him a satisfactory reply. When the season of pilgrimage was over, one day, as I was sorting out my papers and letters, my eyes fell accidentally upon that book. I opened it and found in its introductory pages a moving and exquisitely written homily, which was followed by verses, the tone and language of which bore striking resemblance to the Koran. All that I gathered from the perusal of the book was that among the people of Persia, a man of the seed of Fatimah and descendant of the family of Hashim had raised a new call, and was announcing to all peoples the appearance of the promised Qaim. I remained, however, ignorant of the name of the author of that book, nor was I informed of the circumstances attending that call. A great commotion, I remarked, has indeed seized that land during the last few years. A youth, a descendant of the Prophet and a merchant by profession, has claimed that his utterance was the voice of divine inspiration. He has publicly asserted that, within the space of a few days, there could stream from his tongue verses of such number and excellence as would surpass in volume and beauty the Koran itself, a work which it took Muhammad no less than 23 years to reveal. A multitude of people, both high and low, civil and ecclesiastical, among the inhabitants of Persia, have rallied round his standard, and have willingly sacrificed themselves in his path. That youth has, during the past year, in the last days of the month of Shaban, July AD 1850, suffered martyrdom in Tabriz, in the province of Azerbaijan. They who persecuted him sought by this means to extinguish the light which he kindled in that land. Since his martyrdom, however, his influence has pervaded all classes of people. The sheriff, who was listening attentively, expressed his indignation at the behavior of those who had persecuted the Bab. "The malediction of God be upon these evil people," he exclaimed. a people who in past days treated in the same manner our holy and illustrious ancestors." With these words the sheriff concluded his conversation with me. From Mecca the Bab proceeded to Medina. It was the first day of the month of Muharram, in the year AH 1261, Friday the 10th of January, AD 1845, when he found himself on the way to that holy city. As he approached it, he called to mind the stirring events that had immortalized the name of him who had lived and died within its walls. Those scenes which bore eloquent testimony to the creative power of that immortal genius seemed to be reenacted with undiminished splendor before his eyes. He prayed as he drew nigh unto that holy sepulchre which enshrined the mortal remains of the prophet of God. He also remembered, as he trod that holy ground, that shining herald of his own dispensation. He knew that in the cemetery of Bahá'í, in a place not far distant from the shrine of Muhammad, there had been laid to rest Sheikh Ahmad-i-Asai, the harbinger of his own revelation, who, after a life of onerous service, had decided to spend the evening of his days within the precincts of that hallowed shrine. There came to him also the vision of those holy men, those pioneers and martyrs of the faith, who had fallen gloriously on the field of battle, and who, with their lifeblood, had sealed the triumph of the cause of God. Their sacred dust seemed as if reanimated by the gentle tread of his feet. Their shades seemed to have been stirred by the reviving breath of his presence. They looked to him as if they had arisen at his approach, were hastening towards him, and were voicing their welcome. They seemed to be addressing to him this fervent plea: "Repair not unto thy native land, we beseech thee, O thou beloved of our hearts. Abide thou in our midst, for here, far from the tumult of thine enemies who are lying in wait for thee, thou shalt be safe and secure. We are fearful for thee. We dread the plottings and machinations of thy foes. We tremble at the thought that their deeds might bring eternal damnation to their souls." "Fear not," the Bab's indomitable spirit replied. "I am come into this world to bear witness to the glory of sacrifice. You are aware of the intensity of my longing. You realize the degree of my renunciation. Nay, beseech the Lord your God to hasten the hour of my martyrdom, and to accept my sacrifice. Rejoice, for both I and Qudus will be slain on the altar of our devotion to the King of Glory. The blood which we are destined to shed in his path will water and revive the garden of our immortal felicity. The drops of this consecrated blood will be the seed out of which will arise the mighty tree of God, the tree that will gather beneath its all-embracing shadow the peoples and kindreds of the earth. Grieve not, therefore, if I depart from this land, for I am hastening to fulfill my destiny." Chapter 8. The Bab's Stay in Shiraz After the Pilgrimage, Part 1. The visit of the Bab to Medina marked the concluding stage of his pilgrimage to Hijaz. From thence he returned to Jadi, and by way of the sea regained his native land. He landed at Bushir 9 months after he had embarked on his pilgrimage from that port. In the same khan, which is similar to a caravanserai, he had previously occupied, he received his friends and relatives who had come to greet and welcome him. While still at Bushir, he summoned Qudus to his presence, and, with the utmost kindness, bade him depart from Shiraz. "The days of your companionship with me," he told him, "are drawing to a close. The hour of separation has struck, a separation which no reunion will follow except in the kingdom of God, in the presence of the King of Glory. In this world of dust, no more than 9 fleeting months of association with me have been allotted to you. On the shores of the great beyond, however, in the realm of immortality, joy of eternal reunion awaits us. The hand of destiny will ere long plunge you into an ocean of tribulation for his sake. I too will follow you. I too will be immersed beneath its depths. Rejoice with exceeding gladness, for you have been chosen as the standard-bearer of the host of affliction, and are standing in the vanguard of the noble army that will suffer martyrdom in his name. In the streets of Shiraz, indignities will be heaped upon you, and the severest injuries will afflict your body. You will survive the ignominious behavior of your foes, and will attain the presence of him who is the one object of our adoration and love. In his presence you will forget all the harm and disgrace that shall have befallen you. The host of the unseen will hasten forth to assist you, and will proclaim to all the world your heroism and glory. Yours will be the ineffable joy of quaffing the cup of martyrdom for his sake. I too shall tread the path of sacrifice, and will join you in the realm of eternity." The Bab then delivered into his hands a letter he had written to Haji Mirza Syed Ali, his maternal uncle, in which he had informed him of his safe return to Bushire. He also entrusted him with a copy of the Qasail-i-Sabi, which is literally meaning the 7 qualifications, a treatise in which he had set forth the essential requirements for those who had attained to the knowledge of the new revelation and had recognized its claim. As he bade Qudus his last farewell, he asked him to convey his greetings to each of his loved ones in Shiraz. Qudus, with feelings of unshakable determination to carry out the expressed wishes of his master, set out from Bushire. Arriving at Shiraz, he was affectionately welcomed by Haji Mirza Syed Ali, who received him in his own home and eagerly inquired after the health and doings of his beloved kinsman. Finding him receptive to the call of the new message, Qudus acquainted him with the nature of the revelation with which that youth had already fired his soul. The Bab's maternal uncle, as a result of the endeavours exerted by Qudus, was the first, after the letters of the living, to embrace the cause in Shiraz. As the full significance of the new-born faith had remained as yet undivulged, he was unaware of the full extent of its implications and glory. His conversation with Qudus, however, removed the veil from his eyes. So steadfast became his faith, and so profound grew his love for the Bab, that he consecrated his whole life to his service. With unrelaxing vigilance, he arose to defend his cause and to shield his person. In his sustained endeavours, he scorned fatigue and was disdainful of death. Though recognized as an outstanding figure among the businessmen of that city, he never allowed material considerations to interfere with his spiritual responsibility to safeguard the person and advance the cause of his beloved kinsman. He persevered in his task until the hour when, joining the company of the 7 martyrs in Tehran, he, in circumstances of exceptional heroism, laid down his life for him. The next person whom Qudus met in Shiraz was Ismullahul Azdak, Mullah Sadiq-i Khurasani, to whom he entrusted the copy of the Qasail-i-Sabi, and stressed the necessity of putting into effect immediately all its provisions. Among its precepts was the emphatic injunction of the Bab to every loyal believer to add the following words to the traditional formula of the Ajam: "I bear witness that he whose name is Ali Qabul-i Muhammad," that is a reference to the name of the Bab, "is the servant of the Baqiyatullah," which is a reference to Baha'u'llah. Mullah Sadiq, who in those days had been extolling from the pulpit top to large audiences the virtues of the imams of the faith, was so enraptured by the theme and language of that treatise that he unhesitatingly resolved to carry out all the observances it ordained. Driven by the impelling force inherent in that tablet, he one day, as he was leading his congregation in prayer in the Masjid-i-Naw, suddenly proclaimed, as he was sounding the Azan, the additional words prescribed by the Bab. The multitude that heard him was astounded by his cry. Dismay and consternation seized the entire congregation. The distinguished divines, who occupied the front seats and who were greatly revered for their pious orthodoxy, raised a clamour, loudly protesting, "Woe betide us, the guardians and protectors of the faith of God! Behold, this man has hoisted the standard of heresy. Down with this infamous traitor! He has spoken blasphemy. Arrest him, for he is a disgrace to our faith." Who, they angrily exclaimed, dared authorize such grave departure from the established precepts of Islam? Who has presumed to arrogate to himself this supreme prerogative?